Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Nova Scotia Career and Employment Symposium's sixth and final session of this week. My name is Jack Kennedy. I'm a summer student here at the CEI, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started here, we're just going to wait an additional minute or two just to allow for some final people to enter the web call here. And while we wait here, please feel free to type in your name, organization, and where you're joining from in the chat. Okay, it looks like we can get started here. So good afternoon and welcome again to everyone joining us. The topic for today's panel is gendered experiences in employment. We'll meet here today on a virtual platform. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. Moving forward now, the topic of today's panel is gendered experiences employment. I'd like to welcome Caitlin, who will be our solo presenter today. Caitlin is a current St. FX student studying within the Public Policy and Governance Honors Program and has a background in municipal politics. Caitlin will be presenting her research on implications of Nova Scotia to a public childcare model. Her research explores the implications of the newly publicly funded childcare policy in Nova Scotia and the effects of the transition for women as providers and owners. It explores the gendered aspects associated with the policy change in Nova Scotia and its impact on the careers and livelihoods of workers and leaders in the field. Before I pass it on to Caitlin here, a final reminder that we will hold off all the questions until she's finished her presentation. Within the Zoom call, there's a Q&A function on the bottom of the screen that we ask you to direct your questions toward, which we will answer at the end of the presentation. And without further ado here, I'll pass it on to Caitlin for her presentation.
Thank you very much, Jack. I'll just give me a moment. We'll bring things up here. All right. Hello, and thank you for having me. My name is Caitlin Smith, she, her, and I'll be presenting on our research to date surrounding the implications of Nova Scotia's transition from a private to public childcare model on women as owners and providers of childcare in Nova Scotia. Recognizing we've already had a land acknowledgement this afternoon, I would like to say that our work does not start and stop with a land acknowledgement. Rather, it is one important action to highlight the commitment of continual work. And if we commit to that mindful discomfort toward reconciliation and continue to strive towards uplifting Indigenous voices and joy, we can become stronger together. Again, my name is Caitlin Smith. I am a third-year student in the Public Policy and Governance program here at St. FX. My supervisor and partner in this research is Dr. Rebecca Wallace, an assistant professor in the Department of Public Policy at St. FX. Through the presentation today, we're going to discuss the research topic, our key terms, explore current data, methodology, and research approach, and what we've heard from our participants to date. And then we're going to finish up with our next steps and what we're planning as part of our ongoing research project. As I'm sure some of you are aware, in 2021, the government of Nova Scotia was among the first Canadian provinces to sign on to the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement. The agreement promises significant investment into reducing the cost of childcare for families, creating and increasing access to childcare spaces, and ensuring better wages and employment protection for childcare workers. The new policy has been presented as a barrier-removing policy that will grow and advance the availability, accessibility, and quality of care in the province. Despite the government's announcement that it was ahead of schedule in January 2021, the policy faced pushback from childcare owners and providers who expressed deep concern about the impact of the new policy on their existing businesses and childcare landscape more broadly. Through online petitions and a series of news articles, many entrepreneurs and workers in the field, predominantly led by women, conveyed concern about the lack of consultation on the policy plan, as well as its impact on their livelihood. The goal of our research is to understand how the transition to this new agreement has affected those who are employed in the childcare field, both as owners and care providers. We are exploring this by asking, how has the transition to the new policy affected childcare owners' businesses and livelihood? How has the transition to the new policy affected childcare providers' working conditions and career development in the field? And how do childcare owners and providers feel the policy will affect the accessibility, quality, and equity of childcare services across the province in the short and long term? There are a few key terms we'd like to review before moving too far into our presentation. The first being childcare. When we refer to childcare, we're referring to care services provided by a person or business that is not the primary caregiver of a given child. Childcare can refer to a for-profit, not-for-profit, home care provider, and unregulated care providers. We also use the term woman loosely in our research. We've identified a lack of non-binary literature or data surrounding the childcare field, and based off this lack of information and the self-identification as woman by participants, we've opted to use the terms woman and women. Again, highlighting this non-binary research or data, we have posted this as a possible future research project. Throughout the presentation, you will also hear the acronym ECE. ECE stands for Early Childhood Educator. This is a field that is defined as working with children from birth to roughly age 8 with an associated degree in training. The importance of our research can be summarized in a couple of key areas. One is how the transition to the new system has affected childcare owners and their businesses, as well as childcare providers and their working conditions. In working with our participants, we are able to highlight experts and advocates currently working in childcare field and their perception of the policy's impact to date, and in whether they see the long-term impact of this policy's transition being positive or negative moving forward. The research is also allowing us to explore a heavily female-dominated owner and workforce that is being affected by a rapidly transitioning public policy. Childcare owners and workers are a vital part of our functioning society and economy, and by exploring their experience as women in an undervalued career path, we can better understand the implications of public policy on women as both workers and entrepreneurs in the care field. The third piece of this research is how how by understanding the experience of those working in this field during the transition, we can use that to improve future consultation and negotiations, including on-the-ground implementation of policy. Nova Scotia is one of 13 who have signed on to the Pan-Canada Childcare Agreement, and learning about how the Nova Scotia policy has taken shape over time, it'll allow those policymakers in other parts of Canada who are similarly planning and negotiating their transition to avoid any pitfalls. To understand the needs surrounding the childcare field and industry currently, we're going to do a quick high-level review. Statistically, the youth population in Nova Scotia is steadily declining. Children ranging in age of birth to 5 years account for 5.4% of the total population of Nova Scotia. Even with this low percentage, we're unable to meet the childcare needs of this group. Caregivers who seek outside childcare jump in all provinces, including Nova Scotia, after the age of 5. This is directly tied to access, availability, and affordability of childcare for pre-public school age children. In Nova Scotia, the number of children with employed mothers jumps by 78% at this transition point, which is further evidence to support the access, availability, and affordability theory of childcare. This jump does not align with the available spaces in the province, which points to an unregulated childcare economy in Nova Scotia. Once a child becomes a school age, there's a significant increase in the percentage of caregivers that choose to use unregulated childcare as their primary means of care. This is directly tied to the province's subsidy program for those that need support surrounding childcare. Subsidy funds are
So sorry about that, Caitlin. It looked like Zoom may have crashed. I think we're back. Feel free to take a second if you need it, and then we can get back into it.
All right, I didn't do it, so that's all that matters through this. It was not my fault. Just give me a moment and we'll start again. All right, so as I was saying, salary is listed as the main contributing factor for ECEs choosing to leave the childcare industry. Also closely tied for identified reasons for leaving the industry is lack of mental health supports and career development opportunities. Notably, 85.9% of facilities in Canada are women-owned. 95% of facilities in Nova Scotia are women-owned and operated. Advocates and childcare providers alike claim that gendering and devaluing of care work is a contributing factor that leads to the lack of policy development and social understanding around the importance of childcare work and the childcare field. Our research is drawing on a series of interviews with childcare owners and providers in Nova Scotia based off the previously reviewed research and data to gauge their experience with the province in negotiating the terms of their transition to the new childcare agreement. Although there are some online petitions and news articles on the conflict between childcare owners and the province, this topic has not been studied in a systemic way, nor have researchers explored childcare stakeholders' perspective on how the transition to the new system could affect the accessibility and quality of care in the province. As those who directly provide the services, childcare owners and ECEs are a critical source for learning about the policy's impact on children, caregivers, workers, and businesses. Our interviews will consist of speaking with roughly 25 each of childcare owners, providers, and ECEs from all counties across the province. The interviews take roughly 30 to 45 minutes and are completed voluntarily and anonymously. The use of interviews is strategic in this project, as we believe interviews are the best mode of learning about the diverse experience that childcare owners and providers have, given that they are at the helm of delivering on-the-ground services. Although there are a few studies on the transition from a private to public childcare model, much of the process remains unknown and largely is taking shape behind the scenes. In Nova Scotia, many owners have been vocal about the challenging consultation process, and to my knowledge, there's no existing studies that explore the implications of transition to a public system on those who own a business or work in the childcare industry. Given this is an industry dominated by women, it's particularly important to hear their perspective and learn about if and how the gendered barriers or power imbalances affect the consultation and negotiation process, as some have alluded to in the wider news media. We are currently conducting interviews, hence the so far, but we're already seeing some common themes emerge. One of our common themes is around communication, as has been one of the largest concerns presented to us by providers. The majority of owners or childcare providers say they actually have learned about the changes to their programs through the news media. And even when reaching out directly to the province, they're unable to receive answers to their questions. In the past year and a half, there's been significant turnover and staffing changes at the provincial level, leading to inconsistency in contact people, creating an inability to have meaningful relationship between childcare providers in the province. One participant, who is a director of a not-for-profit facility, said there's still no consistent information which they can give to caregivers and staff. She went on to say, when information is provided by the province, they will send us a beautiful memo with little to no information, and it's often received late on a Friday, resulting in them having to work all weekend. One participant told us that when dealing with the province, they feel like the department has its own agenda. And when it does choose to communicate with childcare providers, sometimes it almost feels deceptive. There's a shared feeling among providers that the province is simply checking a box by conducting consultation and feedback sessions, and the province knows what they're doing before consulting, was shared many times. Providers feel their issues are not being properly considered. If you hear us, take some action, one participant said. This feeling of screaming into the void was shared by every participant we have spoken to so far. Participants from rural areas raised concerns surrounding the impact unique to those operating in their life circumstance. One participant stated that being a small facility and coming from a rural area meant that she and others like her were stepped over and overlooked in the process. Others felt that greater consideration and planning was put into facilities in urban settings. Concern was raised that rural areas will not have enough children to support multiple day homes or larger centers under the new framework and its requirements, leading to a larger number of closures and an increased lack of access in areas that are already referred to as a childcare desert. Facilities were given one of three options when the policy was first introduced: transfer to a not-for-profit model with an agreement, remain a for-profit model with a signed agreement, or maintain the status quo and withgo funding. While trying to decide, participants noted a lack of resources which they could access for their transition. One director from a not-for-profit facility who chose to sign an agreement with the province stated she felt they were losing their identity by signing on to the agreement. 90% of the participants to date have signed an agreement with the province or transferred to a not-for-profit model. 100% of those participants saw an increased administrative burden. This burden includes repetitive and inefficient paperwork that's given to providers without instructions, guidance, or training. We came to learn that a group of private facility owners are working together to understand the new administrative requirements. They have come to rely on each other as they're unable to get answers from the provincial representatives. There's also the financial burden put on facilities by signing the agreement. One example given was the required nutrition plan that may align with the Canadian Food Guide, but does not always align with the young child's willingness to eat that food. The amount of food waste has become such a problem that some facilities have implemented waste reduction programs. One participant gave the example of buying a cantaloupe versus strawberries. The cantaloupe may fall within the agreements, but the odds of being eaten are significantly lower than strawberries. However, under the agreement and the inability to cover the cost of strawberries due to inflation and market fluctuation, their choices are limited. When discussing the engagement table, which the province formed in response to the outcry of the industry surrounding lack of communication and consultation in the policy process and implementation, participants noted a feeling of hopefulness during its development and then a feeling of being let down due to its lack of effectiveness. One participant refers to the table as being more of a show at this point than as an effective communication tool. This lack of effectiveness has been attributed to the province not providing information to the table and not on behalf of the table participants themselves. Participants feel the engagement table allows them to ensure the province knows the reality of working in childcare and the impact this policy has on them. An example of concerns raised at the table is one around ratios of workers to children that do not account for helpers, meaning that a ratio may be 1 worker to 6 children, but having a non-ECE worker on the floor as a helper leads to stronger programming. Another example of this is a cook or nutritionist for a facility who may receive no additional remuneration and is often a minimum wage employee. When questioned about the positive or negative impacts the current framework may have on the ECE training and career development, there's been significant concern raised. While all participants agree that there is a lack of workers in the field, their concern is that the current criteria for training programs is being reduced in order to increase the number of workers. Career development is also hindered by the way the policy has been developed. A long-stated concern from the industry is that career development sessions take place on the weekends and not during the work week, meaning that unlike other industries, such as teaching, they're not given in-service days and must give up personal time for career development purposes. Concern has also been raised surrounding ECE compensation packages, which has been pushed back to a fall release date. The majority of participants feel the industry hinges on this package being sufficient enough to maintain the current workforce and to entice new workers. One participant went so far as to raise the possibility of developing an ECE union. As far as quality of care, the majority of participants stated they feel an increased quality will depend on the person or facility. They felt that most facilities currently maintain a high quality of childcare and programming. However, this will protect any lower quality childcare from slipping through the cracks. Several participants stated the need for the minimum quality standard to be set higher than the current level. Roughly 70% of our current participants feel that ECE education and training programs are producing graduates of lower quality and knowledge base than in the past. Concerns have been raised that staff availability numbers may increase, but the quality of those staff members is going to be lower due to the push to pump out as many trained educators as possible. Several participants raised the concern around the quality of care and ratio requirements. The concern is that the ratios will continue to rise to meet the promise of childcare spaces and the required needs of caregivers. As these ratios will rise, that will lead to less personal contact and connection between the childcare workers and the children. There was a positive identification of increased funding to cover staffing costs and support for children's needs. One example given by a participant was a child who was a flight risk. Under the new policy, they were able to access funding to hire an additional staff person to support that child that they would not have been able to access previously. 97% of our participants to date feel that gender played a significant role in the policy development and implementation process. The constant theme of feeling that a male-dominated industry would have been given a higher consideration and a longer consultation process has emerged. One participant stated that women's work in childcare is looked at as it's just a babysitter, and their impact on society is not adequately considered. Participants also felt that a male industry would have their requests met with immediate action versus being compiled into a list for later discussion like the women are currently experiencing. The consensus for all participants was that childcare work or care work has been undervalued by society, and they feel that this undervaluing and its connection to gender has been instrumental in the process to date. Most stated that the ideal scenario would be an equal 50-50 gender split at all childcare facilities. They feel there needs to be a significant public engagement campaign for that to be achieved. The participants stated that the general population do not understand the impact and implications of childcare work, and undervaluing of their work has what's led to these gendered misconceptions. One participant is quoted as saying, "Society needs to break the stereotype that it's women's work and needs to be valued for the work that we do." She went on to say that the undervaluing of this work and lack of understanding by the general public surrounding the importance of the work is why there's been so little respect given to the industry historically. One piece we had not anticipated was the mental health impact of the policy implementation. Every participant interviewed to date highlighted increased stress and anxiety surrounding the process. Reports of episodes of insomnia and checking out of personal life to try and cope with the increased stress surrounding the process were also reported. While most acknowledged that mental health concerns were connected to the childcare field prior to policy implementation, they all feel that this has increased significantly since this policy has been implemented. Increased rates of burnout and retirement have been connected to the policy shift, and there's concern that those with decades of experience are going to leave the industry due to mental health burden, and those entering the field will not have the ability to be mentored by those with mountains of childcare experience and knowledge. One participant told us of a worker suffering a stroke at her facility. As the ambulance arrived to take that worker away to receive treatment, they expressed wanting to stay on the job until the end of day, as they were worried about not maintaining ratio within the facility and the negative implications associated with that. She gave this as an example of childcare workers putting their work and policy requirements ahead of their own health. One of the questions we're asking every participant is if they anticipate being in the childcare field in 5 years' time. The majority of those we spoke to were very clear they intend to stay in the industry until retirement. One worker told us, "It's been my dream my whole life to own my own center." Others spoke about the pure love and passion childcare providers have for what they do. Those that say they do not intend to stay in the field cite the struggle and pressure associated with the job and the low salary. One director who's been in the childcare industry for 22 years is actively seeking other employment due to stress associated with the policy shift. She told us, "I don't like coming here anymore because of the way things are going." She explained that when she finds work outside the childcare field, she'll be leaving the industry permanently. We have also been able to speak with providers who chose to leave the childcare industry as a result of the shift to a public policy framework. One participant stated, "I feel like I was forced out of the industry." Others noted the mental burden and subsequent physical tolls surrounding the unknown of the process. There seemed to be no middle ground on this question. Either childcare providers were on their way out the door or fully committed for the remainder of their time prior to retirement. The next steps in our research will take us over the better part of 10 months. As previously stated, we're still conducting interviews, and following the completion of those interviews, we plan to transcribe and develop data information. We are then going to do up to 3 research papers and have plans to present at up to 3 conferences, assuming we can get in. Current paper topics include I should say, current possible paper topics include childcare owners and provincial negotiations, early childhood educators and the transition to the new model, and childcare workers and owners' perspective on the childcare accessibility and quality. All these papers will include a gendered and devaluing of care work perspective. I'd like to thank you for your time and interest in this topic. On this slide, I've provided my contact information if you have any questions, or if you have a piece of information you think I might find interesting. Please feel free to reach out, as I'd love to chat about this topic.
Okay, thank you so much, Caitlin. I think that was a fantastic presentation. It's pretty obvious for anyone viewing how much time and effort you put into that. And I think it was really a great presentation to kind of close up what's been such a successful week so far in terms of these symposiums. We'll kind of open up the floor here to some questions here. We have a couple that have popped up in our Q&A chat. I'll start you off here with the first one. So the first question is here. Can you speak to why this subject was something you wanted to research or why it matters to you?
Sure. So I am a parent of 3 myself. And to give you an example of why this is so important to me, I was unable to access childcare this summer. I'm relying on summer camps and friends to help me out. So when I began realizing what an issue it was for me to access childcare, I began looking at why there is such a lack of childcare to begin with. And then after discussions with Dr. Wallace, we kind of just kept rolling through these conversations and came up with this premise for a topic.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste some of these questions in here kind of as I'm asking them. But the next question is, do you have any data about owners' salaries before and after the transition?
We do not. Where the transition is so new, a lot of that data is still being developed. We have requested some of that information, and we're hoping by the end of the project we'll have some of that to present, but that is not currently publicly available.
Okay, awesome. This next question here is a little bit more lengthy, so I'm going to copy and paste it in the chat here. But do you have any statistics around areas of need for childcare in Nova Scotia? Just curious if there are any areas in particular that stick out, and if you can speak in more detail about the shift to a public childcare provision causing closure of smaller childcare businesses, especially in these childcare deserts.
Okay, so areas in need, for example, Guysborough County, which is the largest county in Nova Scotia, has no registered childcare facilities. So there are no licensed or registered facilities in that entire county. So there's an example of an area in need. But then you could also look at an area like Antigonish County, where St. FX is located, that has, I want to say, it's under 5 facilities. But they're not meeting the needs even of that. One facility I know has a wait list of over 200 families. That's not necessarily children, that's families waiting for care. So even in areas where they're not considered a desert, we're still not meeting the needs. Now the shift, I'm sorry, could you remind me the second part of the question there? It was about the shift to the public.
Yeah, it says, just curious if there are any areas in particular that stick out, and if you can speak in more detail about the shift to public childcare provision causing closure of smaller childcare businesses.
Sure. So with the shift for smaller facilities, a lot of smaller facilities were running under a different program than is required in order to receive the funding. And by the funding, I mean the reduced fees for families. Once they shift and sign this agreement with the province, it has different regulations under that agreement that they have to follow. These regulations increase administrative burden. A lot of them have had to use an accountant where they hadn't in the past, or as we spoke about the nutrition burden, which I know can feel very flippant when we discuss the nutrition burden, but when you consider the price of food and how things are changing, that is a significant burden for childcare facility owners, especially smaller rural ones who are depending on a smaller group of children to maintain their employment and income.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So we have two questions left here. This next one's coming in from Haley Jordan, and she asked, throughout the process of your research, what was one of the biggest things that you learned that you did not know prior?
I think the thing that I found most interesting was the lack of respect and acclaim given to women entrepreneurs in the childcare field. And what I mean by that is, if you had a smaller town where an entrepreneur started a business and was able to franchise that business into 2 or 3 subsequent facilities, they would be uplifted as an example of excellence in that community. And we're not seeing that same amount of respect given to our women entrepreneurs in the childcare field. I'm assuming, and we're going to explore this a little further, this is connected to our general lack of understanding and reverence for care field in general. But that's probably been the most interesting thing that I've seen, is that lacking there.
Okay, I'll ask you one last question here. Thank you for these answers. I know we're kind of grilling you with questions here, but do you have any plans to speak with representatives of the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, if that's the correct department, to get their input on the feedback that you're hearing from these business owners?
Yes, so I have been in contact already with provincial representatives, and they're aware of the project we're doing. We were originally going to speak with them in the beginning, but had decided that we're going to wait until our results are finalized and then take those to them for response. We felt that that was a better way to move forward versus this back and forth all over the place. So once we have completed our research to an extent, we're then going to go to them with what our findings are and give them the opportunity to respond.
Awesome. Okay, we got one more question rolling in here. Not sure if this is one of your questions to them, but do most feel that a direct subsidy to children's guardians might have a better route to go? I'll kind of copy that in the chat as well here.
So that was not one of our direct questions we had, but it often comes up in our interviews around what is the best avenue with which to present subsidies. The discussion then comes up around previous subsidies or previous programs that have been in place by government, your universal benefits and whatnot. I'm sure anybody who's had children or worked in this field understands what I'm talking about, that have been discontinued with this new program. They've proven to be ineffective. They've proven to be too broad and not pointed enough to those that need it the most. So I don't think the question is necessarily whether it is better for it to go directly to the parents or to the providers. I feel the providers feel comfortable with it going through them. It's just the route in which this policy development and implementation has taken place that is causing the issue.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the way you answered all those questions was fantastic. You obviously have so much knowledge in this area, and it's really great to see. I'll kind of leave it open here for another minute in case anyone has any final questions here. And if not, we can conclude.
I will just say I had actually an interview this morning. As I said, we're still working on this research, and I had one of the participants say something that really struck home with me. She said, women have fulfilled the need of providing care when the government has failed. And now the government is failing these women who have picked up that burden in the past. And I just thought that was really well put and really poignant, and something that I thought was worth mentioning here at the end of our session today.
Awesome. And if you just want to read the chat here for a second, Caitlin, Paul has sent one last question here just through the general chat. She says, for follow-up research, it would be interesting to follow up with those who have left to see what their next career steps are, still entrepreneurship.
Yes, we've, like I said, spoken to a couple who have chosen to leave the industry due to this. A lot of them are, taking a break to try and regroup after having to close their businesses and the type of upheaval that causes in their lives. But the majority of them have expressed that they intend to continue to be self-employed.
Okay, well, I think that's it for questions. Do you have anything you want to add before we conclude here? Thank you so much again, and thank you to everyone for joining in the panel right now, and those through the previous 2 days. It's been a really awesome thing to be a part of.
Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Jack, for your moderation through this.